Evan had lived 25 years on this earth, and most of those years felt quiet, heavy, and lonely. He had worked as a ranch hand, a fence repairer, a stable cleaner, and sometimes even as a hired rider when a cattle drive needed an extra man. But no matter where he worked, he never stayed long. Jobs ended, herds moved, seasons changed, and towns shifted like dust in the desert wind. In all those years, he never found a place that felt like his own. People came and went, but he stayed the same. Someone simple, someone quiet, someone easy to overlook. Then one day, he saw a small note pinned to the wall outside the general store. It simply read, "Desert Shack, for sale $25. Must pick up key from Old Man Harrow." No picture, no details. Just a line of rough handwriting. Most people passing by laughed at the idea. A shack in the middle of the desert was nothing but trouble. But something about it caught Evan's attention. Maybe it was the price. Maybe it was the idea of finally having a place that belonged only to him. He didn't have much, but he had $25. So he rode out to find Old Man Harrow and bought the shack on the spot. The old man warned him, "Son, that place has been empty for years. Sand gets inside, wind sings through the boards, roof leaks like a broken bucket, but it's yours if you want it." Evan nodded, took the key, and thanked him. It was the first time he had ever bought anything important. 25 years old, and at last, he owned something, a roof, 4 walls, and a patch of land near a narrow river. He rode toward the desert shack the next morning with his small bag strapped behind his saddle. The ride took hours. The sun hung high in the sky, burning red against the pale sand. There were no towns, no fences, no houses along the way. Only open land and the long sound of wind brushing over rock and dust. Evan didn't mind. He liked the quiet. He liked the feeling that something new was waiting for him. When the shack finally appeared in the distance, he almost laughed. It was small, crooked, and looked like it might fall if someone leaned against it too hard. But it was real. It was his. Evan tied his horse to a post outside and stepped toward the front door. The hinges squeaked loudly when he pushed it open, and dust rose in the air like it had been waiting years for someone to disturb it. Inside were a single cot, a broken table, and a chair missing one leg. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He spent half the day cleaning, sweeping out the floor, dusting the windows, and fixing the chair so he could sit without falling. The desert heat made sweat roll down his back, but he didn't mind. Every sweep of the broom made the place feel more like home. When his stomach finally growled, he remembered the river nearby that he needed to check. Water mattered more than anything. Without it, the shack wouldn't be worth even the $25 he paid. He walked down a narrow path of dry grass and thorny bushes until he heard the soft sound of running water. The river was thin, but it moved gently, clear and cold compared to the hot desert around it. He smiled to himself. A river this close meant he could live here. He could drink, wash, and maybe even grow a few things if he wanted. He stepped closer, planning to fill his canteen. But then he froze. Across the shallow water, he saw 3 figures. At first, he thought they were wild horses or maybe travelers crossing the river. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized they were women, 3 young women around his age or slightly younger. They stood in the water, washing dust from their arms and faces, talking to each other softly, laughing as if the desert belonged to them alone. Evan's breath caught in his throat, not because of anything improper, but because he had believed the desert was empty, that he was alone out here. He hadn't expected anyone, especially not 3 sisters, to be so close to his shack. He felt heat rise in his face, a mix of surprise and awkwardness. He didn't want to disturb them or make them think he was watching on purpose. He quickly looked away, stepping behind a group of tall bushes to hide himself. His boots made a small sound in the sand, and one of the sisters turned her head. Her voice carried across the water. "Someone there?" Evan swallowed hard. This was embarrassing. He didn't want to cause trouble on his first day living here. He cleared his throat and stepped out slowly, keeping his eyes down so they wouldn't think he meant anything wrong. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Didn't know anyone was nearby. I just came to check the river." The three sisters exchanged a look, but none of them seemed angry. The oldest, with dark hair tied back in a loose braid, called out, "It's all right. We didn't know." Someone moved into the old shack. "Folks say nobody lives there anymore." Evan nodded, still embarrassed. "I just bought it yesterday. Didn't mean to bother you." You didn't bother us," the second sister said, smiling in a friendly way. She had light brown hair and a calm expression. "We use the river most days. Our ranch is up that way." She pointed toward the hills behind them. The youngest sister, who seemed full of energy even from a distance, added, "We didn't expect a neighbor in the middle of the desert. What's your name?" "Evan," he answered softly. "Well, Evan," the oldest said, "we'll leave you be. Just didn't want you thinking you'd walked into trouble." They laughed gently, the kind of laughter that made the morning feel less awkward. Evan waited until they walked away from the river and disappeared behind the hill before he finally let himself breathe normally again. He wiped sweat from his forehead and quietly filled his canteen. He kept replaying the moment in his head. It was strange, but not unpleasant. After so many lonely years, it felt surprising to see people so close, especially friendly ones. He returned to the shack, still thinking about the three sisters. Their voices had sounded warm, confident, and familiar, like they had grown up with the desert wind as their companion. He wondered what their ranch looked like, how they survived out here, and how long they had been living near the river. As evening approached, he lit a small lamp inside and sat on the repaired chair. The silence around him felt different now. The land was still empty, but no longer lonely in the frightening way. Knowing that others lived close by brought a strange comfort. It made the desert feel less like a wasteland and more like a place with hidden stories, quiet neighbors, and unexpected human warmth. He leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling as the last orange light of sunset filtered through the window. Maybe buying this shack wasn't such a foolish idea after all. Maybe this was exactly the place he had been searching for, a place where something new, something unexpected, might begin. He didn't know if he would ever see the sisters again, or if they were just passing by that morning. But the thought of neighbors, even ones he met in such an awkward way, made him feel less alone than he had felt in years. With that gentle thought easing his tired mind, he closed his eyes, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The desert was quiet, but he was no longer the only soul in it, and that made all the difference. Evan woke up early the next morning, long before the sun rose. The desert was still dark, but a soft blue light touched the sky. He stepped outside the shack and breathed in the cool air. It felt different from the day before, like the land had opened a small door for him. The river's faint sound reached his ears, reminding him of the unexpected meeting with the three sisters. He still felt a little embarrassed when he remembered how he froze by the water, but he also felt a strange warmth. After years of living around strangers, he now had neighbors, even if he met them in a way he would never forget. He made a small fire and boiled water for coffee. As he sat on the doorstep, sipping slowly, he kept glancing toward the hill, where he had last seen the sisters. He wondered if they were awake, if their ranch chores had already begun, or if they even remembered him. He wasn't expecting anything special, just curious. The desert didn't usually offer surprises 2 days in a row, but that morning, it did. A little after sunrise, Evan heard the sound of horses approaching. He stood up quickly, brushing dust off his shirt and trying not to look too startled. 3 figures appeared from behind the hill, 3 horses, 3 riders, moving confidently through the open desert. As they came closer, he recognized them. It was the same sisters from the river, each riding with steady control like they'd grown up in the saddle. They slowed as they reached his shack. "Morning, neighbor," the youngest sister called with a cheerful wave. Evan raised a hand awkwardly. Morning," the oldest sister spoke first. "We figured we should introduce ourselves properly. Yesterday was unusual." He nodded, feeling his ears heat a little. "Yeah, I'm real sorry about that." "There's nothing to be sorry about," the middle sister said with a calm smile. "We were just washing up. You didn't do anything wrong." The youngest leaned forward on her saddle with a playful grin. Evan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Their friendly tone made everything easier, like a heavy rock rolling off his shoulders. The oldest dismounted first. "I'm Mara," she said. "These are my sisters, Elise and Tessa." Elise, the middle sister, nodded politely. Tessa, the youngest, gave a lively salute from her horse. Evan introduced himself again, this time without stuttering. "Nice to meet you properly." Mara looked around at the shack. "So you're fixing this place up?" "I'm trying," Evan said with a small laugh. "It'll take work." "That's true," Elise said. "That shack's older than all of us, but the land around it is good. The river is steady most months." Tessa jumped off her horse and walked around the shack, looking at the walls, the roof, and the small window. "It's not bad," she declared. "Just needs cleaning, patching, maybe a new roof, maybe new windows, maybe—" "Tessa," Mara interrupted gently. "What?" Tessa said, shrugging. "Just helping." Evan laughed for the first time in days. The three sisters felt like a warm breeze in the middle of the desert, lively and calm at the same time. Mara stepped closer. "We came to invite you to our ranch later today. We figured you might need supplies, and the ride to town is long." "I don't want to trouble you," Evan said politely. "It's not trouble," Elise said. "Neighbors help each other out here. Besides, you can't survive long in this desert alone," Tessa added. "And we have extra food, and tools, and maybe some old furniture you could use." Evan hesitated. He had always kept to himself, but something about their honesty made him feel safe. "I'd be grateful," he said finally. "Good," Mara replied. "We'll come back in a few hours and ride together." When they left, the desert felt strangely empty without their voices. Evan used the waiting time to work on the shack, fixing a loose plank and cleaning a corner filled with old leaves. He kept smiling to himself whenever he remembered their visit. For someone who had spent most of his life feeling invisible, it felt strange, almost unreal to have three people come looking for him on purpose. A few hours passed, and he heard horses again. The sisters returned, ready to lead him to their ranch. Evan saddled his horse and rode beside them. The path twisted through dry grass, scattered rocks, and low hills. The sisters talked as they rode, each sharing small pieces of their lives, and Evan listened quietly. Mara told him about their late parents, who had worked hard to build the ranch from nothing. Elise explained how they managed the crops and animals, and how difficult things sometimes got without enough help. Tessa spoke endlessly about everything: the weather, the desert birds, the river, and even the color of the sky, her energy brightening the entire ride. After nearly half an hour, the ranch finally came into view. It sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst winds. The house was big but worn, with a long porch and wide windows. There were small barns, a chicken coop, and fields stretching wide with signs of careful work. Evan was impressed. It wasn't fancy, but it felt alive. As they arrived, the sisters guided him inside. Elise handed him a cup of cool water, while Mara pointed to shelves filled with tools, spare blankets, and old but usable supplies. Tessa proudly showed him a chair she thought would fit perfectly inside his shack. The warmth they offered wasn't forced. It felt natural, like they were used to helping people when they could. Evan felt a quiet gratitude swelling in his chest. He didn't know what he had expected when he bought the $25 shack. Maybe silence, maybe old memories, maybe just more loneliness. But he certainly didn't expect this. Mara packed a small crate of essentials for him: dry food, matches, nails, a lantern, and a hammer. Elise added a few small jars of homemade fruit preserves. Tessa insisted on giving him a clean blanket and an extra cup. Evan tried to refuse, but they wouldn't hear it. "Take it," Elise said gently. "You're by the river too. If you ever need anything, just ride over. Or shout loudly," Tessa said with a grin. "The desert carries sound pretty far." Evan smiled shyly. "Thank you. Really. Come back any time," Mara said. "We mean it. People living this far out should never feel alone." He stayed for a while, helping fix a loose hinge on the barn door, and the sisters invited him to share a simple meal before riding back. The moment felt peaceful, easy, like he had known them longer than a single day. When he finally returned to his shack with the supplies tied behind his saddle, the sun was already dipping low. The sky glowed warm orange, and the desert breathed slowly as night approached. Evan placed the new items inside, set the lantern on the table, and unrolled the blanket across the cot. The small, simple changes made the shack feel different. Less empty. More alive. He sat outside, watching the last light fade behind the hills. In his mind, he replayed the laughter of the sisters, their easy conversations, and the way they welcomed him without hesitation. He realized something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The desert was still wide, still harsh, still carrying the silence of miles and miles. But he wasn't alone anymore. 3 sisters had crossed that silence and opened a door he never knew he needed. They didn't know him well, but they treated him kindly. They didn't owe him anything, but they still gave him more than he expected. For the first time in years, Evan felt that life might finally start moving in a better direction. And as the night settled and stars filled the sky, he knew deep down that his quiet desert world had changed forever. The next few days passed quietly, but the quiet did not feel heavy the way it once did. Every morning, Evan woke. He felt a little lighter. He fixed small things in the shack, collected firewood, checked the river, and sometimes rode toward the hill just to see the sisters' ranch in the distance. He didn't visit uninvited. He respected their space, but knowing they were there changed everything inside him. The land no longer felt empty. It felt shared. But on the 4th morning after their visit, something felt different. The desert wind carried a faint tension with it. The air seemed sharper, almost alert. Evan had lived around ranchers long enough to sense when something was wrong, even before anyone said a word. He noticed strange footprints near the riverbank, boot marks from someone who wasn't him, spaced in a hurried pattern, moving in circles like someone was searching for something. He crouched down and studied the tracks carefully. They were fresh, possibly from last night. He looked around the wide open land, wondering if the sisters had seen anything unusual. He tightened his belt, mounted his horse, and rode toward their ranch. He tried not to imagine trouble, but the desert didn't lie. Tracks didn't appear for no reason. When he reached the ranch, he found Mara and Elise outside repairing a fence. Tessa was carrying a bucket of feed to the chickens. Their faces showed signs of worry, though they tried to hide it with polite smiles. "You're up early," Elise said, brushing dust from her hands. Evan dismounted slowly. "I found boot prints near the river," he said. "Did you all see anything strange last night?" The sisters exchanged a quick look. Mara stepped closer. "We didn't want to alarm you, but, yes. Someone came near our property after dark." Tessa's voice was softer than usual. "Our water pump was damaged again." Evan's eyebrows rose. "Again?" Elise nodded. "It happened last month too. Someone loosened the bolts and cracked the pipe. We repaired it, But last night it happened worse. Any idea who? Evan asked. Mara shook her head. Not exactly. Some ranches near the far valley have been having problems too. Missing livestock. Broken fences. People sneaking around at night. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes held concern. We don't know why. Some say thieves are hiding somewhere in the desert, using the river path to move around, without leaving dust trails. Evan felt a small knot tighten in his stomach. The desert could be dangerous, not just because of heat and snakes, but because trouble could hide in places no one expected. A broken pump wasn't random, it was a sign. Let me help, he said immediately. You don't need to, Elise replied kindly. We don't want to pull you into our problems. You're my neighbors. And if someone is sneaking around the river, that affects me too. He paused, then added honestly. Besides, I owe you 3 more than you know. Mara gave him a grateful smile, one that carried both relief and trust. All right then, we'll fix the pump together. The 4 of them walked behind the barn to where the pump stood near a small well. The metal pipe was cracked, just like Elise said. Someone had hit it hard with a tool. The bolts were half unscrewed, and footprints surrounded the area. Whoever did it worked quickly and quietly. Tessa knelt beside the pump and pointed. See this? These marks weren't here yesterday. Evan crouched next to her. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted this broken. What for? Tessa asked, frustrated. Why break a pump when we barely have water, as it is? To weaken you, Evan said quietly. Maybe to scare you. Maybe to force you to leave the ranch. The 3 sisters stood silent for a moment, letting the idea sink in. Their ranch wasn't big, but it was valuable, clean water, open land, crops, and livestock. If someone wanted to claim the land, chasing away its owners was one way to do it. Evan stood and rolled up his sleeves. Let's repair it. And tonight, I'll keep watch. You don't have to stay here, Elise said. You have your shack. I can still watch from the riverbank, he replied. The desert carries sound far. I'll hear if anything happens. Mara agreed. We'll take turns. None of us should be alone out here at night. Go. 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 They worked together for hours. Evan held the pipe steady while Mara tightened the bolts. Elise mixed sealant from clay and resin, spreading it to cover the crack. Tessa brought tools, fetched water, handed out cloths, and talked the entire time with bright energy that kept everyone's spirits up. Even while helping, she managed to make everyone laugh. Working beside them felt natural. Their teamwork didn't need instruction, it flowed easily, as though they had been repairing things with him for years. By the time the sun was at its highest, the pump was fixed. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. Inside the ranch house, the sisters prepared lunch and insisted Evan stay. They talked about the ranch, their parents, their struggles, and the strange events happening in the valley. Every story felt like a piece of a puzzle falling into place. The area wasn't as peaceful as it looked. A quiet desert often hid loud problems. After lunch, they rode the land together, checking fences, the animal pens, and the crops. Evan spotted more footprints near the far edge of the property. This time, deeper in the soil. Someone had been scouting the place. He pointed them out, and Mara's jaw tightened slightly. She thanked him quietly. The sisters were strong, but they had been carrying this burden alone for too long. As evening approached, they returned to the ranch. Tessa lit lanterns around the porch, while Elise closed the barn doors. Mara stood beside Evan, staring toward the river. You think they'll come tonight? She asked softly. He nodded. If they came last night, there's a chance they'll come again. And if they do, we'll be ready. He didn't have weapons, and he didn't want trouble. But he had a strong voice, a good horse, and enough courage to stand guard. Sometimes, that was enough. When the sun went down, the desert cooled fast. Evan took position near the river, a place where he could hear footsteps echo across the sand. The sisters stayed on their porch with lanterns dimmed, watching but not interfering. Hours passed. The desert grew darker. Coyotes howled in the distance. A cold breeze brushed across the land. Then, just before midnight, Evan heard something, a faint crunching sound, slow and careful, coming from behind a clump of desert shrubs. He held his breath and stepped forward quietly. The footsteps grew louder. Whoever it was moved like someone who didn't want to be seen. Evan took a deep breath and shouted, "Who's there?" The figure froze. Then, startled by the sudden voice, they ran. Evan chased a few steps, enough to see a shadowy shape darting across the riverbed before disappearing behind the rocks. But loud enough that Mara, Elise, and Tessa heard him and came out with lanterns. "Someone was here," Evan said, breathing hard. But they didn't get close enough this time. "2. You scared them off," Elise said with relief. Tessa looked at him with shining eyes. "You heard them before they made it to the ranch." Mara placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you, Evan. Truly." He nodded. "We'll watch again tomorrow. They won't scare you off this land." The sisters stood quietly, their lanterns lighting the ground as a warm glow surrounded them. For the first time in days, they looked less afraid. They weren't alone anymore. And as Evan walked back to the riverbank, the thought settled deep inside him. The desert still held danger, but it also held purpose. And maybe, just maybe, it also held a new life waiting to unfold. The next morning came softly, with sunlight spreading like warm paint across the desert sky. Evan hadn't slept much. He stayed awake by the river until dawn, listening to every sound, watching every shadow. The sisters had checked on him from time to time, offering him water or asking if he needed anything. He always shook his head and told them to rest. They needed their strength more than he did. After sunrise, Evan rode to their ranch to update them. Mara was already outside, tying ropes to a post. Elise was feeding the goats. Tessa was brushing the horses with her usual bright energy, though there was tiredness around her eyes. "You were out there the whole night," Mara said gently when she saw him. "Didn't want anything to slip past me," Evan replied. Elise walked toward him with a soft smile. "We appreciate it more than you know." Tessa stepped beside him and squinted at his face. "You look tired. I'll rest later," Evan said, waving a hand. "First, we need to talk about a plan. Very one rest, waving maybe Caesar. Very one first." The sisters gathered around him near the small porch. He told them everything, how he heard the intruder, how the person panicked and ran, and how he saw the shadow heading toward the far rocks. Mara folded her arms, thinking deeply. "They'll probably come back," she said. "Most likely," Evan agreed. "Not tonight maybe, but soon. Whoever it is wants something from this land." Elise's voice was steady yet worried. "We can't fight thieves without help." "You don't have to fight them," Evan said firmly. "We just have to show them they can't scare you anymore." The sisters listened silently, trusting him more than they could explain. Evan realized something then. He wasn't just a stranger living by the river anymore. He had become someone they depended on. For the rest of the day, they worked together on a stronger plan. Evan helped reinforce the barn doors, tighten the fence, and add extra locks to the water pump. Elise built a small alarm system using empty cans tied with wire. Tessa dug out hidden spots near the river where dry branches could crack loudly if someone stepped on them. Mara checked the animals and made sure every path leading to the house was clear and visible from the porch. By late afternoon, the ranch looked more secure than it had in months. When they finally sat down to rest, Tessa handed Evan a cup of cold water. "You should live here," she said suddenly. "It would be safer for all of us." Evan blinked. He didn't know how to respond at first. Live here? Elise smiled gently. She means you could stay on the ranch. In the small cabin behind the barn. It's empty now. Mara added. It would help all of us. You'd have a proper room, and we'd have someone watching the land when we're busy. Evan looked at their faces, sincere, hopeful, trusting. He thought of his small shack near the river. It wasn't much, just a roof and some old boards. He had no deep connection to it yet. But this ranch, already felt like something more. You really want me to stay here? He asked quietly. Mara nodded. Yes, Evan. You've helped us more than we expected, and we don't want you facing the danger alone either. Tessa grinned. See? Everyone wins. Evan felt warmth rise in his chest, something soft and surprising. No one had asked him to stay anywhere in his whole life. He always drifted alone. But now, 3 sisters were offering him a place, a role. A small piece of family he never thought he would have. If you're sure, he said softly. We're sure, Elise said. That evening, the 4 of them moved some of Evan's things from the river shack to the ranch cabin. The cabin was dusty, but sturdy. It had a wooden bed frame, a shelf, and a window facing the fields. Evan cleaned it quickly, set down his blanket, and placed the lantern the sisters had given him on the shelf. The cabin didn't feel like just a room. It felt like refuge. When night came, Mara suggested they all take shifts watching the land again. Evan refused at first, but Elise insisted. We share this place now, she said. So, we share the worries too. They lit lanterns and placed them where the glow wouldn't give away their positions. The night grew quiet. Almost too quiet. The desert sometimes held its breath before something happened, and Evan could feel that stillness now. Hours passed. Tessa dozed off on the porch bench with a blanket over her. Elise stood near the barn, alert but calm. Mara and Evan watched the far end of the field together. Their silhouettes shared a quiet seriousness, their breaths steady. Then, sometime past midnight, they heard it. A crack of dry branches. A second crack. Someone had stepped right where Tessa had set the traps. Mara stiffened. Elise straightened at once. Evan moved silently toward the sound, signaling Mara to stay back. But she followed him anyway, keeping a few steps behind. They approached the edge of the field where the moonlight touched the ground. A figure crouched near the water pump, thinking no one could hear him. Evan took a deep breath and shouted, "Stop right there!" The intruder jerked in surprise. He stumbled backward, tripped over a rock, and fell hard onto the ground. Before he could stand again, Mara lifted her lantern, shining the light in his direction. Elise and Tessa hurried over. "Who are you?" Elise called out firmly. The man covered his face, trying to hide his features. I didn't mean nothing," he stammered. "I was just passing through." "Passing through doesn't mean breaking someone's pump," Mara said sharply. Evan stepped forward. "Why are you here? Why this ranch?" The man swallowed and hesitated. His clothes were worn, his boots muddy, and his hands shook. He finally muttered, "Some folks. They said this land's easy to take. That the owners can't defend it. Said the sisters won't fight back." Tessa gasped quietly. Elise clenched her jaw. "Ace." Evan crouched closer, staring at the man. "Did those folks tell you to scare them off?" "Yes," the man whispered. "Said if we break enough things, maybe the sisters will leave. Then, they'd claim the land." Mara's face hardened. "Who told you this?" I can't say," the man trembled. "Please, don't hand me to the law. I didn't hurt nobody. I just did what I was told." Evan sighed. The man wasn't dangerous. Just desperate. A pawn in someone else's plan. "Leave," Evan said firmly. "And don't come back." If you do, we'll call the sheriff." The man nodded rapidly, scrambling to his feet. He ran into the night, disappearing into the desert darkness. Silence settled again. Tessa broke it first. "So, someone really is trying to take our ranch." Elise put a hand on her shoulder. "But they failed." Mara turned to Evan. "You stood by us tonight. You didn't let fear win." "Oh." He shook his head. "You all stood together. That's what matters." They walked back to the porch, lanterns lighting their way. The tension slowly faded into the night air. When they reached the steps, Tessa suddenly jumped forward and hugged Evan tightly. "Thank you," she said, in a small, emotional voice. Elise smiled warmly. Mara looked at him with deep, quiet gratitude. "You're one of us now," Mara said softly. "This ranch is your home too." Evan looked at the three sisters, feeling something rise inside him that he hadn't felt in years: belonging. Real, solid belonging. He glanced toward the dark fields, the river, the hills around the valley. He had bought a broken shack for $25, hoping for nothing more than peace. But instead, he had found people who trusted him, needed him, and welcomed him not as a visitor, but as family. The ranch felt alive, full of warmth and hope. And as dawn approached, Evan realized his old life of drifting was over. He had found somewhere to belong, somewhere to protect, somewhere worth staying for. And it all began on the day he bought a forgotten shack and accidentally discovered a new world waiting just across the river.